Hello and welcome to Clumsy Crafting, Episode 2. Today we're going to be learning about crocheting. Last week we talked about knitting, today we're going to be talking about crocheting. They're both very popular crafts and they often get confused for each other, but there are some key differences. First of all, knitting uses 2 needles and yarn, whereas crocheting uses yarn and a hook. Crocheting also creates a very different texture and stretch to a material. Crochet material is often stiffer and more sturdy than knitted material, which is often more of like a woven texture. This is the needle I'll be using today. It is a size H, size 8 or 5 millimeters, all of the sizes are used. And this is the yarn, size 4 worsted weight aqua. A small note about hook sizes is that they use 3 different measurements. So there's size H, size 8, and 5 millimeters. Generally, you're going to want to stick to the millimeters for your measurements because that is more accurate. And different companies use slightly different sizes for the different letters and numbers, and you don't want to deal with that. Similar to knitting needles, crochet hooks can come in all different sizes. This size B looks like it's about the same width as a sewing needle, whereas this size K hook is made for thicker rope-like yarn. Another interesting you might find while looking for crochet hooks is this type of hook called a cable needle. They're both hooks, but they're used for very different things. A cable needle is actually for a specific type of knitting called cabling, whereas a crochet hook is obviously for crocheting. You will notice that the heads of the hooks look very different. So, as long as you're careful, you shouldn't ever mix them up. Now we're actually going to get into the act of crocheting. Now the way you start a crochet project is you start with a chain of stitches. And just like a knitting project, you're going to start with a slip knot. So what you're going to do is you're going to make a loop, run the tail under the loop, and then weave your hook through and pull it tight. And the thing about crocheting is when you're starting with a chain, you want to make sure that your tension stays even. You need to make sure that all of your stitches are about the same length and that all of them are about the same level of looseness and that it's close to the amount of width and looseness that you want the actual project to be. This didn't matter as much when we were knitting. It does matter in crochet because if your first row is too tight, your piece is always going to be curling and bending in on itself. If your first row is too loose, then the edge of your row is just going to be very holey and you're not going to like that. So you want to make sure that the tension stays sturdy. What's also really important is how you hold the yarn when you're crocheting. So generally you're going to want to hold the tail with your second finger and thumb, just like I'm motioning with. And then you're going to wrap the yarn around your first finger so that you can keep a constant tension on it. You also might want to hold it by the knot instead of the tail in order to maintain that tension because holding it by the tail sometimes will yank the stitch really tight. And again, you don't want that. So what you're going to do is you're going to yarn over the hook and pull the yarn through. And that's how you make a stitch. And see, you're going to want to keep the stitches about the same length. Yarn over again and just cleanly pull through. And now you've got another stitch. And you can kind of move your fingers up the chain as you go in order to get a better grip of it. Now you'll notice I'm doing a little bit of a twisting motion every time I do a stitch, and that's to make sure that the yarn catches on the hook and is pulled cleanly through without tugging on the loop that you're going through. It's all right if you do catch a few fibers or little bits of string, but you generally don't want to. You want to pull it through clean and smooth. Now we've chained 11 stitches. Our project is only going to be about 10 stitches wide, but we want the extra stitch, especially on the first row. Now you'll notice that your chain is a little bit stretchy and you'll notice that all of your stitches look like these little V's, and that's exactly what you want. So now we're going to do a row of slip stitch, and this is basically the most basic crochet stitch you can do. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your crochet in your thumb and second finger and hold the yarn, and you're going to go into the second stitch from the needle. Not the first one, the second one. And you're going to try to go under both loops of the V. Generally when you're crocheting, you're going to want to try to go under both loops. Now, the ones facing away from you are called the front loops, and the one facing towards you are called the back loops. But using the back or the front loops only creates a certain kind of look. And if that's not a specific look you're going for, you don't want to do it. So generally you're going to want to try to go under both loops. And this can be really hard for your first row because everything's really thin and you don't always have a great grip. But just do your best. And if you need to, get in there, use your hands to pull it over the hook, push it in. It's fine. I'll admit my camera work went up a bit high, but don't worry, it'll come back down. Now, so you're going to weave under both loops so that your needle is in through the second stitch from the hook. And then you're going to yarn over and pull through both the stitch and the loop that's on the hook. Now you can do what I did and pull through both at the exact same time with the same motion, or you can pull through it in two phases where you pull through the stitch and then through the loop like I just showed you. Either way, the goal is to take your yarn over and pull it through both the stitch and the loop. That's the end goal of a slip stitch. And you're just going to keep doing this for all 10 of your stitches. Now by the end, you'll notice that it's a little curled in and tight, and this is because our tension got a little weird between our first row of slip stitch and our first row of chains. This tension and this curliness will even out as you continue crocheting, but it is going to stick around for the first row or two. What you're also going to want to do every single time you finish a row in crochet is count how many stitches you have. I know that sounds like a lot of work. I know that sounds like an excessive amount of times to do it, but that's just what you're gonna need to do. Because in crocheting, it's really easy to lose your stitches, and you don't want to do that. You want to maintain the same number. Now we're going to move on to a row of single crochet. After slip stitch, single crochet is the second most basic crochet stitch you can do. It's also one of the most common. Single crochet and double crochet are probably the ones you're going to be doing the most. So first you're going to chain one stitch at the end. That's what you do every single time you end a row. You chain a couple number of stitches so that you can do the next row. Now you're going to turn your work in crochet, which is so much easier than turning in knitting, because in knitting you gotta flip around all the needles and everything, but in crochet you just spin it. Now what you're gonna want to do for single crochet is go into the first stitch after the chain, and you're gonna go under both loops. And unfortunately with this row I was struggling a little bit, so I became a little bit negligent in regard to filming, so there's a lot of shots where I'm just straight up out of frame. I'm real sorry about that, but the first few rows of a crochet project are always really hard, and that's part of the reason why. So see, what you do in a single crochet is you go in through the stitch, you yarn over, and then you pull up a loop. And then you pull through the two loops on the hook. Rather than a slip stitch that pulls all the way through both loops, you pull up two loops and then you pull through the two loops. I could show you footage of me struggling for 10 stitches, but I'm just going to skip to the end of the row real quick. And once again, you're going to want to count them really quick, make sure that you still have 10 stitches, and then you have a row of single crochets. And you'll notice that the single crochets are just a little bit taller and wider than the slip stitch. For instance, the single crochets you can kind of see are forming like little knots, whereas the slip stitch are just a very thin row of like weavings. Now that we've finished our row of single crochet, I'm going to teach you how to do a half double crochet. And this is basically the stitch in between a single crochet and a double crochet in size. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make 2 chains. Now here's where I kind of messed up, and you're going to see me fix it later. But generally in a half double crochet, you're going to want to go to the second stitch after the chains, because the chains will be your first stitch in the row. I did not do that. So obviously mine's going to look a little bit weird until I fix it. Now what you're going to do for a half double crochet, and you can kind of see it, is you're going to yarn over, go in, pull up a loop so that you have 3 loops on the hook, and then you're going to pull through all 3 loops. And you're going to see it again. Yarn over, go in, yarn over, and pull up a loop. and then pull through all 3 loops. And then you will have done a half double crochet. Yarn over, in, pull up a loop, pull in through all 3 loops. And you're just going to keep doing that down the row until you've got 10 stitches. And there we go. I'm making my final half double crochet. And there you go. You've got a full row of half double crochets. And again, you're going to want to count it. Make sure you've got 10. I have 11 because I messed up, and those chains are supposed to be my first stitch. You should have 10, you should have 9 stitches plus the little group of chains. Again, I messed it up. You're also going to notice that the half double crochet is a little bit taller than the single crochet, which is a little bit taller than the slip stitch. And that's because we keep growing in size with our stitches. Once you're done counting, pull your yarn taut, and we're going to start doing a double crochet row. Now for double crochet, you're going to want to chain 3. And again, you're going to want to go into the second stitch of the row. I did not. I messed it up, but that's what you're going to do. So hold the crochet with your second finger and thumb, which is now much easier because you have a substantial amount to hold on to. Yarn over, go in through the stitch, pull up a loop, pull through the first 2 loops, then pull through the second 2 loops. So for a double crochet, you're only going to pull through 2 loops at a time, whereas with a half double crochet, you pull through all 3. So again, yarn over, go into the stitch, pull up a loop, and then yarn over and pull through 2, and yarn over and pull through 2. And that's how you do a double crochet. I'm just going to speed through the rest of the row here. But you'll notice that it's much easier for me to crochet this row because 1, I know where my stitches are, so it's much easier for me to see and get into them. 2, there's a lot more of the project for me to hold, which is good because that allows me to get the good grip on it. Now I'm just going to wrap up my double crochets here real quick. And now you'll see we have this nice little rectangle of fabric. Well, yours will be a rectangle. Again, I made that error with the first couple chain stitches, so mine is a little bit curved at the edges. And again, you'll notice the double crochet is much taller than the half double, which is taller than the single, which is taller than... Now I'm going to teach you how to do a triple crochet stitch, or a treble crochet. They use both terms. I'm not really sure why, it's just what they do. This stitch is considerably less common than the single, half double, and double crochet, but if I'm showing you all the basic stitches, I might as well get into the triple as well. Again, this one is also very tall, and it's a lot more floppy than the other stitches, so you will lose some of that structure that you really want with a crochet piece. So just keep that in mind when deciding what stitches you do want to use for a project. At the start of every row of triple crochet stitches, you're going to chain 4. This will serve as your first stitch. And again, you're going to want to go into the second stitch from the chain. I go into the first, you're going to go into the second. So first you're going to yarn over twice. Then you're going to insert into the stitch, yarn over, and pull up a loop. This will give you 4 loops on your hook. Then you're going to yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2 again, and then yarn over and pull through the final 2 loops. And this will give you a very tall stitch. And that's what you're going to keep doing throughout the whole row of triple crochets. You're going to yarn over twice, go in through the stitch, pull up a loop, and then yarn over and pull through 2 loops at a time until you're down to just 1 loop on the hook. And there might be a couple instances where you forget you're doing a triple crochet and you only yarn over once. I do it a couple times. You're probably going to do it a couple times. Just remember, yarn over twice and then pull through 2 loops. Now I'm just going to quickly speed through the rest of my triple crochets here. You can see I'm moving on to my last stitch in the video. And once you're done with your last stitch, we're pretty much done with this project. Well, you'll be done. There will be a brief moment where I realize my mistake and I go back to fix it, which is obviously what you can do also with your projects because they're yarn. You can fix the mistakes. Once again, we have that nice little rectangle, and you can see your triple crochets are a little bit taller than your doubles, and you can see me very clearly realizing my mistake. While I'm quickly fixing that, there is something I do want to discuss. And that's that while knitting terms are pretty consistent throughout the world, crochet terms are not. For instance, in England, they often use English crochet terms, which means that a slip stitch would be called a single crochet, and a single crochet would be called a double crochet, and a half double crochet would be a half triple, and so on. I don't know why they do that, but they do. So it's a good thing to keep in mind when you're looking for patterns online. Generally, they will tell you if they're using British or American terms. I'm American, so I use American, obviously. But it's just something you do definitely want to keep an eye on because that will trip you up for sure if you're not paying attention. Now we're just going to take a few more seconds and wrap this up real quick. Again, just make sure to pay attention to what stitch you're going into when you first start the rows because your first stitch will always be those chains. And when you're going into the final stitch, you can do it two ways. You can go in through one of the tiny chains, or you can do what I do and you can go through the big loop created by the chains. This makes the hole created by the chains a little bit more obvious, but it's also just so much easier than trying to fit your hook into those tiny little chains. See? Once again, you're just going to want to count your stitches real quick. Make sure that you have the 9 stitches and the chains because you do want to end with the amount you started with. Anyway, I had a lovely time crafting with all of you, mistakes aside. And I hope you had a great time crafting with me as well. This is Clumsy Crafting. I am your host, Bray Wright, and I will see you guys all next week for some advanced knitting techniques. Until then, have a nice day.